chat, I figured out why all the Pepelas have suddenly shifted it from Afghanistan and praising the U.S. military and special operations in Afghanistan to this whole Taiwan thing. It's so odd how they like seemingly coordinated together. Pepela DB, Pepela V. And what is happening with all that money that we're sending to Ukraine? What's happening to all that money we send to Ukraine? Oh, never mind. Wow, CBS deleted their documentary because of liberal pushback. We removed a tweet promoting our recent documentary, Arming Ukraine, which quoted the founder of the nonprofit Blue Yellow, Jonas Omen's assessment in late April that only around 30% of aid was reaching the front lines of Ukraine. Since that time, Omen says delivery has improved. Additionally, the U.S. military has confirmed that Defense Attaché Brigadier General Garrick M. Harmon arrived in Kyiv in August for arms control and monitoring. This is what I originally was going to show you, chat. They deleted the documentary. They deleted the document. They had a 30-minute documentary. They deleted it all. This is all that I can find.
In the past 2 months, we've moved weapons and equipment to Ukraine at record speed. Drones, grenade launchers, machine guns.
We're seeing this incredible, historic flow of weapons coming into Ukraine. Do we have any sense as to where they're going?
We don't know. There is really no information as to where they're going at all.
You know, all this stuff goes across the border, and then kind of like something happens, it kind of like 30% maybe reaches its final destination. 30%?
Are you concerned about weapons getting in the wrong hands?
I don't care at all whether that happens.
What sort of a unit do you command? Can't say. Okay.
You know, there are like power lords, oligarchs, political players.
One of the biggest targets are convoys like this transporting weapons.
Europeans had come to believe that that project of integration had effectively meant the banishment of armed force. All of a sudden, not far from the borders of the EU, was the most significant war since World War II.
So in other words, we have ourselves a situation where God knows how many billions of dollars of weapons, advanced weapons, are just flowing into one of the most corrupt countries in Europe, which was known for it. Prior to the war, Ukraine was known as a place that was largely lawless for corruption. Here's the full thing. All right. We might watch this. Our British king is killing it. All right, hold on.
People are fed up with the way they're treated at work. We need to turn that mood into real organisation on behalf of the working class.
Enough is enough.
There's always another crisis, and it's always workers who pay the price. We've suffered the biggest pay squeeze in history, and workers become all about working harder and faster for less. And now they want you to pay for it all again. Well, it's time somebody else paid the price.
Things can't go on like this.
Record profits for big business, record number of billionaires, record wealth for the top 10%. But life is getting harder for everyone else.
You always make the sacrifices, yet they always reap the rewards. None of this is inevitable.
It's a political choice, your need or their greed.
So it's time everyone in this country who's got a rotten landlord, who's got a low wage, who's got in-work benefits, who's going to a food bank, who can't get a doctor's appointment, who can't get housing. It's about time we all stood up together and said, enough is enough.
This cost of living crisis affects us all.
This is not just about rail workers or cleaners.
Posties, engineers or call centre workers.
Or nurses, or teachers, or firefighters.
It's about you and every workplace and every community across this country.
It's time for a campaign that draws the line.
It's time to say
enough is enough.
Fair pay, affordable bills, enough to eat and a decent place to live. These things are not luxuries, They're your rights.
This is a campaign to bring people together.
For a real pay rise, to slash energy bills, to end food poverty, and for decent homes for all, and to finally tax the rich and big business.
If you agree, share this video, spread the word.
And sign up today
Boggers,
at WeSayEnough.co.uk.
We can't be divided. We need everybody campaigning for a better deal.
We will be organising rallies, we will be forming community groups, and we will be on picket lines.
We're going to be standing up for ourselves.
We're going to fight.
We're not all in this together. We never have been. The people that are in this together are working class people who've been mugged for far too long.
It's time to say enough is enough. Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
Enough. Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
It's time to channel anger into action.
Hell yeah. Absolute poggers. Since we talked about organized labor, there's a video that I wanted to show you that's pretty damn exciting. And will help talk about the history of organized labor in the US. It's called The Fall and Rise of Unions in the US. It's from Vox, so prepare yourself for some lib shit. Prepare yourself for some lib shit, but maybe it won't be so bad. Okay, let me put it this way. What's wrong in it, I will correct. All right? What I disagree with, I promise I will correct, and you will enjoy it. All right, be right back, chat.
This is queso.
Yeah, and then we'll cover the Keppel stuff later.
And Beans does not like to be picked up.
Oh, Beans is big.
This is Beans. Yes.
Oh, so sweet.
She's doing me.
This is Cameron. He's one of our subscribers. He lives in Indiana with his high school sweetheart, and he sent us this question about unions.
How come we've seen such a decline in unionization in the U.S., and specifically why the unions from manufacturing didn't transfer over into services?
Here's what he's talking about. The share of workers in the U.S. who belong to a labor union, like I do, has fallen to around 10%. If you take out the government employees, it's 6%. And have you ever been part of a union? It sounds like you haven't.
No, I haven't. What got me interested in the question was just the recent news, especially around Starbucks.
Starbucks workers in upstate New York,
Santa Cruz,
Philadelphia,
Mesa, Arizona, more than 20, 30, 100,
200 Starbucks locations
have voted in favor of joining a union so far.
Unions have been catching some momentum here in the U.S. And if we can make sense of the historical decline, we might understand what it would take to reverse it. Answering big questions like this usually involves answering a bunch of smaller questions. And
so the one thing I would say that is a fact that is very interesting is that you can look at the day FDR died is almost totally the highest level of unionization we had as a country. And then it went sideways for like 20 years, and then it started to decline really fast.
And the first one that popped into my head was, did union density decline in other countries too? And the answer is
but
yes,
not as much.
Meaning that some of the decline reflects international trends. What happened was that as these economies grew over time, globalization and automation steered job growth away from domestic factories where union membership was high. Instead,
hey, they moved the domestic factories to where? China. All right, we're going to watch that.
It went mostly into service-providing jobs where unions weren't well established. All new workplaces in the U.S. are born non-union. So when you chart the total number of union members in the U.S. against the huge growth in the workforce, it looks less like the unions collapsed than that the economy kind of grew outside of them.
Timeout.
There's a new paper out by an economist named Zachary Schaller, and it estimates that around 40% of the decline in union elections in the U.S. can be explained by this growth and change across sectors. But he found that union elections fell within sectors too, which means that most of the decline was caused by something else. Something that explains how we ended up with even lower union membership than other similar countries, like Canada.
Like, look at Canada, chat. Like, they were rising. It wasn't until like the late 90s that they actually have started to decline. They've pretty much held form for most of their history.
Cam, check out this chart. It compares union membership in the U.S. to that of our neighbor up north.
Okay, so this graph is really interesting. The U.S.'s union density peaked way earlier than I thought it did, way back in the 1950s. I thought that was...
Actually, it's back in 1942. This is basically FDR's death, but it's okay. It's fine.
in the 80s.
Oh, and also this paper has a similar chart that just shows the private sector data, so I'll drop that in here too. The steepest drops in private sector union density came in the 80s, but it was already falling by then, which made me wonder, what triggered these steep declines that started in the 1970s?
I can hear you, but I can't.
I asked historian Nelson Lichtenstein to walk me through it.
There you are.
You know, in the immediate post-war period, the 50s and 60s, there was a sense American capitalism works. Unions are functional to a kind of consumer society.
Free enterprise and capitalism, which the communists despise, have given the American worker the highest standard of living in the world.
I mean, everyone's going to have a suburban house and a Chevy in the driveway, and that led to this kind of stolid complacency.
Unions negotiated some solid wages and benefits during the economic boom after World War II.
Their main weight was in the building trades and manufacturing. And frankly, they saw, what is the typical worker? Well, it's some white male, Midwestern manufacturing. There was a kind of, sexism. Well, we don't need to organize these retail clerks. They're all, women. They're just there for pin money or something. So sure, yes, one can properly criticize the union movement, especially then.
If the process of forming a union is like hiking up a hill, and the slope of that hill is set by economic conditions, you'd want to make a push when the unemployment rate is low, because going into the 1970s, that hill got a lot steeper.
I want to point out, well, this is where they're really being liberal, is that your legal regime is very important. You can make unions basically automatic to form. You can subsidize them. You can make it so that they, by law, everybody's in a union automatically. You could do all sorts of shit to change union density. And obviously, the more mandatory you make unions, the stronger they're going to be.
Inflation went through the roof,
Rock.
Unemployment jumped, imports were cutting into industrial profits, and employers respond to these pressures with an anti-union assault. They moved factories to the south to avoid union labor. You see an increase in companies hiring anti-union consulting firms and permanently replacing striking workers. And this strategy gets a boost from Ronald Reagan in 1981.
This morning at 7 a.m., the union representing those who man America's air traffic control facilities called a strike.
Technically, federal employees aren't allowed to strike, but that hadn't been enforced before. Well, after the union refused a counteroffer, Reagan fired 11,000 striking workers.
There just is no other choice.
It was a signal. It was the first time the federal government had been behind the destruction of a union for many decades. And every manager in the country said, we can do things we couldn't do before.
Which leads me to ask, what role has government policy played in the union decline?
Reagan,
here's the process established by U.S. law. First, at least 30% of workers at a shop need to sign a petition saying they want a union. At this point, their employer can voluntarily recognize them like Vox Media did. Otherwise, they go to a secret ballot election. If a majority of voters says yes, the employer is now obligated to bargain with the union. But they are not obligated to ever agree on a contract. For those that do, it takes on average 409 days, according to Bloomberg law. I called up sociologist Barry Eidlin to find out how this is different in Canada.
If you don't have a contract by the end of the year in most parts of Canada, then the negotiations get referred to an arbitrator who can then impose an agreement. That doesn't actually get used a lot, but the fact that that's the end point completely shifts the incentive structure.
U.S. policy allows plenty of opportunities for delay. In Canada, the time between the petition and the election is limited to 5 to 10 days. In the U.S., it takes 46 days on average. During that time, supervisors can pull workers into mandatory meetings advising them to vote no. That's all legal. Firing workers for organizing is not.
Coming out of college, one of my first jobs was as a manager in a warehouse, and I got to see a little bit of what the anti-union kind of talk was all about when someone that was hourly just mentioned it, and the general manager pulled us into one of the operations manager's offices. It's really small, really crammed. We're all standing up, and he just says, if anyone says, can I curse? Because he cursed. Are you fine? Absolutely. Yeah, he said if anyone said, or if anyone hears the fucking word union, I want you to tell me. I want you to make sure that person doesn't say it to anyone else. That just kind of stuck with me, and everyone just accepted it for what it was.
Was there any other talk of organizing among the workforce that you were aware of?
No. The person that mentioned organizing was fired, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 weeks later. There was a real effort to document every single thing that he did that could be considered an infraction so that he could get written up. We stacked those all up until he qualified to be fired, and he was fired immediately.
If an employer gets caught retaliating against an organizer in the US, they have to promise not to do it again, reinstate the worker, and award back pay.
Minus whatever wages they had earned from other employment that they had sought. It's not even the full amount that they would have earned if they were on the job. And meanwhile, they send a message to the other workers that, this is what happens when you try to unionize, and they get to engage in the anti-union campaign without a key leader in place. So it just makes no sense to obey the law.
Since the 1930s, changes to labor law in the U.S. have generally limited the tactics unions can use while making it easier for management to make their voice heard. But even if you change those laws, you still need workers who are willing to fight. Hey, Cam.
I mean, it depends on just how much you tilt the laws in favor of unionization. If you look at, say, like Finland or Sweden or Norway, they're very tilted in the favor of the unions. They have what's known as sectoral bargaining. So, I mean, depending upon what laws you have, you can very quickly double the number of people in unions if you have different laws.
Cam, it's Joss. Just sending over some news out of New Jersey from yesterday, in case you didn't already see it.
I scrolled through that thread and read the article attached to it, and it looks like, COVID maybe gave everyone a lot of perspective. At least that's what it seems like for me in that article. But really interesting. Thank you for sending that.
Medieval times united.
The last question I had when I saw the union decline is, do people actually want to unionize? There's not a ton of data on this, but public approval of unions right now is higher than it's been since the 1960s. And a nationally representative survey in 2017 found that 48% of people who were not in a union said they'd vote for one at their workplace. 48% is here. That's a tough gap to close. But with the pandemic as a catalyst and the unemployment rate low, unions are having a go at it in 2022.
One of the effects of union decline just means that a lot of people just don't know people in unions, don't know what unions do. So then the effect of these kind of breakthroughs is that it changes people's consciousness by making those options more realistic. And something that, like, I could actually take a risk and actually try to win this thing, and I might actually have a decent chance of getting it.
So that's everything that I found. It's more complicated than I hoped, but are there any questions you have about the history or any of that?
No, I don't have any questions. It's been like really exciting to kind of go through this and see all the work that goes into it. It's awesome.
Well, we really appreciate you sending in the question. We're going to use this as a pilot episode to try to get more people to send us questions. So hopefully people will see it and want to do what you did.
Pretty nice stuff. Pretty exciting shit. I think that we have a shot, and the conditions that we have in our economy, boomers are starting to retire. This is the difference. Is like, for the longest time when I was, if you're like a millennial like me, boomers were in their 50s and 60s. Now boomers are hitting their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so they're leaving the workforce, and there is a gap. There's going to be more jobs than there are people to fill them, and that's going to put a lot of power back in the hands of workers. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap